All right, we are back. It's good to be speaking with you again, Dr.
Yeah,
Sadler.
likewise. I always enjoy our conversations, and it's work that tends to keep us from having as many as
Right.
we'd like, I think, right? So it's
Yeah,
a fitting topic.
yeah. Work. So it is difficult to even begin the discussion of work. Where do we begin? Because it is not always clear where other activities, non-work activities end and work begins. Like
Yeah, there's
what?
there's that, and I think we have so many possible places of entry as well. We can think about, like, what work is to the ordinary person as opposed to somebody who's more specialized. We can think about our own experiences working different jobs. We can joke around about it. We can be very serious about it. There's like so many entry points, and it's difficult to choose which one ought to be the
Mhm.
first one. So how are we going to do this?
Yeah, maybe a disclaimer from my part on my part, just to say that my experience is limited. When I talk about, for example, I have this, maybe I'm inclined to talk about things like work as an expression of identity, as work and personal development. Then, I might neglect that some people don't have the luxury to think in those terms, because for them, work is a necessity, is an economic necessity,
Well,
and they
even
don't care. Yeah. Go
even
ahead.
for people like that, very often it is part of their identity, but it's an identity that is imposed upon them that they don't get to choose. They'll still often, in addition
Mm,
to the many other ways they talk about themselves, they'll say, I am a janitor or cleaner, or I work at Starbucks, or I, do this or that. I'm a security guard. I
mhm.
think there's a tendency, it's very often associated with Americans because so many Americans for so many generations have identified themselves with their work. But I kind of think this is worldwide.
Mhm.
People do identify with what it is that they're either they get to choose to do or they're forced to do,
Right.
right?
So either identifying with the activity, or identifying with the resistance against the activity, like identifying,
Yeah.
I'm the person who is not this, and I consciously remind myself and others in some ways that I'm more
I'm
than this
yeah,
work.
that's exactly the words I was going to use, is the more than this,
Mhm.
you know, there was an interesting Twitter conversation that I observed and didn't I resisted the temptation to get involved in part because I have too many things to do to
Mhm.
spend time at this point in the semester on a very interesting Twitter conversation. And it was about work and the kinds of work that a lot of people say, oh, nobody should have to do that, so maybe we would farm it out to technology, or it's the sort of thing that we would give to immigrants, or people who are from poor areas or didn't go very far in their education. And so they were using the word cleaner, which here in these states we would say janitor. And a lot of people were weighing in and saying, I don't mind cleaning. As a matter of fact, I actually enjoy doing that. And when I was, at this point in my career, I was working nights as a cleaner or a janitor. Myself, I actually did work for a janitorial service when I was a teenager. And then when I was in the Army, and then when I was working in restaurants, you of necessity did a lot of cleaning. And there was zero choice about it. If you were low on the rank thing, you were
Mhm.
cleaning.
Mhm.
And I myself, I don't find it onerous or something I don't want to do. But the thing that the person pointed out that I think was really quite brilliant, people don't want to do that 40 to 60 hours a week, and
Mhm.
they don't want to do it for very low pay. And they also don't want to be looked down upon by other people for doing that, in many respects, very important activity. If people who do the cleaning go on strike, you realize very quickly how important it is to have people doing that sort of
Mhm.
work,
Mhm.
especially if you're in a high traffic area like an army barracks or a restaurant where things get, or an apartment building, things get messy very quickly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think there's really something, I like this insight that there's lots of things that there's some people willing to do it,
Mhm.
it's just that we pay so little for it, and we expect people to suck up a lot of insults and the opposite of prestige from people higher up in the social
Mhm. Mhm.
ladder for doing that sort of work. And if we
Mhm.
didn't do that, if we honored that sort of work instead and saw it as valuable, sort of like what was happening with COVID, and oh, we have all these what did they call them? Not necessary, essential employees,
Right.
essential workers, right?
Mhm.
Well, that went away so quickly. If we really did treat people as if they were essential workers, I think a lot of people would be perfectly happy doing that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It is unfortunate and a little bit disturbing that we tacitly demand from certain types of workers to just continue for low pay, as you said, but also be in some ways invisible, to stay out of the way, to stay out of the
Yeah.
scope of our attention. And
Yeah.
when I interact with uh, cleaners, in my building, for example, I see that they don't expect to somebody to say hello to them. They don't expect to receive that kind of like a conversation. They don't expect to be a conversation partner with someone because they have been like placed, they've been positioned. And I think most people in that kind of work, they get used to that. Treatment becomes a habit to them,
We could call
unfortunately.
those lonely jobs in some respect. Being, we've got that expression, being lonely in a crowd. And I think that's a great example of that. In a restaurant, people pay attention to, of course, the manager and the person at the door, whether it be a host or hostess or a maitre d if you're getting in a fancy place, and then maybe the chef will come out and talk or stuff like that. But nobody wants to talk to the busboy, you
Mhm.
know. And some people even treat their servers as if they're just dirt beneath their feet. You really learn a lot about people by observing how they
Yes.
treat those in lower social positions.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, I think there's two things that have led me, actually three things that have led me to engage with people, no matter where they are in the scale. And one of them is, of course, I'm a big talker, as kind of are you, uh, not quite Socrates type, but
Sure.
getting close to it, where you'll talk with just about anybody and find out what's going on,
Mhm.
which could be a good thing or could be a bad thing, depending. And then working a lot of jobs that people would consider undesirable jobs, or dead end jobs is another word that gets used back, not so much recently, but back in my formative years, from my teens all the way into my 20s. And then I come from a family of people who mostly it were in the trades, which are usually good paying jobs, or were working jobs like that. My mother worked as a secretary for years and years and years, mostly in academic institutions, but in other places as well. And that it gave me an incredible advantage when I got to graduate school, because I would, I just treated secretaries as if they were, surprise, surprise, human beings, and
Mhm.
interacted with them. And then they would open all the doors for you. And I quickly came
Mhm.
to realize that within a lot of academic institutions, at least at the department level, it's the secretaries who are actually making the place work, who are
Mhm.
scheduling everything. If you need some paperwork done, they're the ones who get it done. The chairs will come and go, but secretaries are a permanent fixture. And at the place that I went, the graduate secretary had been there for 35 years. She was actually the one who got me my funding, you know.
Hmm.
She was the
Wow.
one who would sign off the chair's name on things and would make policy,
Mhm.
and she'd only had a high school education, but she had this incredible network of contacts throughout the entire university.
Mhm.
And if you came in and got on her good side, it was very helpful for you. If you came in and you treated her in a bad way because you think secretaries don't matter, well, you couldn't get anything done, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
for me, those are the things that led me to be, what would you say, be open to conversations and treating people as if they're on the same level as me. And I'm kind of curious, is that something
Mhm.
that you see this sort of thing as well? What are the factors in your background that
Mhm.
led to you, or was it a deliberate decision? Hey, I need to be more a man of the people, kind of thing on your part.
Yeah.
What was the
Uh,
process?
I'm not sure, but I also remember an episode where one time I was really running late to go to the airport, and I was rushing, and I told the department secretary at the time, and the secretary of our department, psychology department, ended up driving me to the airport because I was late.
Wow.
And while we were on the way, she asked me not to tell anybody. She said, please don't tell anybody, because I don't have this kind of relationship with any of the faculty. They kind of
Yeah,
treat
yeah,
us, they treat the administrators as administrative staff as like inferior, like clearly
yeah.
inferior, lower class. So keep this between us. I think the experience of immigration had a big impact for me. And
Interesting. Yeah.
because I kind of transitioned, like I was outside of academia at first. I was just in the society, confronted with a new society. That's one probably. And so I didn't take it for granted. Like university was always a strange place, the way academics talked and treated each other. And the way they took status seriously, I never really bought into that. It's like never really being able to take monopoly money seriously. It's kind of like the,
You know, I kind of think you and I probably have a similar thing with the academy, and not being from a family that, you know, tells you here's how the things actually work, right? We have to
Mhm,
figure it out as we go along. But I know that there are a lot of first generation college and university students for whom that doesn't happen. They do internalize all of those stratified structures, and they become workaholics because they have to please, you know, all of these different essentially internalized ideals of, you know, the great professor who's going to talk to me because I'm on a research project or something like that.
mhm.
And it's too bad for them, right? Because they're making themselves miserable for something that probably isn't going to pay off
Mm, mhm.
in the way that they want.
So here's a branch of that topic. I think we talked about cleaning jobs or
Mhm.
janitorial jobs. I think that every job has its janitorial aspects or janitorial dimensions. So think,
Okay.
for example, of a professor who is really willing to spend time on the essays written by their students. And
Yeah.
another teacher or professor would be unwilling. It's like, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
I want to spend minimal amount of time. So that kind of repetitive aspect of the work, the aspect of the work that is, as we said before, invisible, relatively thankless, and people
Yeah.
are not willing to do it. And I think that kind of availability that we were talking about, seeing more of what is involved in the situation, I think you will be willing to do more, like the janitorial aspect of a professorship position, so to
I
speak.
was just I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to some of my terrible examples from undergraduate and graduate school, and you know they were negative role models in that respect.
Mhm.
I had my philosophy professor when I was an undergraduate, who became the dean later on at the college. He was not a morning person, and he'd scheduled his classes for 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning. And one day I asked him, after I'd taken a few classes with him, you know, you're clearly not happy at this time in the morning. Why don't you could schedule them any time in the day you want to? And he said, well, I like to get that sort of crap finished with early on so
Oh,
I can get to
wow.
my real work.
Wow.
And I, you know, I thought, well, okay. I mean, a lot of the students in the class are not particularly happy about being in the class. I can understand his perspective to some degree, but I didn't share it. And then
Mm.
when I was in graduate school, one of the other professors who I really respected in a lot of other ways, he told me, when you become a professor, find yourself 2 or 3 classes like intro or ethics that you can come up with a standard syllabus for and several different standard assignments, and then you never have to change it anytime in your career. You just like keep plowing away at it, and you can do it without even thinking about it.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then you can, once again, then you can preserve your time and your mind and your attention for real work, the
For the
things that
real
really
work.
matter,
Right,
you know.
right, right.
And I, you know, obviously I didn't do that sort of thing. And for, you know, thank God, because teaching as many service classes as I have, it would have been bad for my students, and it would have been a real waste of my time to behave in that way. But I think a lot of people probably would have responded and said, yeah, that sounds like good advice. I will do
Mhm,
that. You
mhm,
know,
mhm.
I imagine it goes the same in psychology, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was as an undergraduate student, I was a little bit naive. One of the things I did was I just for fun I wrote an essay on personal identity and philosophical psychological ideas related to that, and then I was very eager to get some feedback on that essay. It was not a
Mm,
term paper,
yeah.
and I showed it. I tried to show it to a couple of professors. One of them, at least, at the end, was willing to read it, but most of the professors I talked with were like, "What is this? Like you want me to read it? Is it for a course?" So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so that autopilot style of work like setting things up so you don't have to think about it, and just going with the structure, going with an established structure.
I did have another teacher from undergraduate. And since, I'm not complaining about her, I'll actually mention her name. Her name is Lucretia Crawford, and she was a writing instructor. I believe she's still there, although she must be close to retirement by now. And she taught, we had two different writing classes that you had to take as a freshman. I think the first one was like expository writing or something like that, and then the second one was persuasive writing, and you'd have to like learn different genres, and this is all kind of standard stuff at colleges and universities. So in the persuasive writing class, the final product and project was supposed to be about a 15-page paper arguing some case, using evidence, doing some research, and you would work on it over the course of the semester. And I decided to look at, I was reading this book at the time. I think it's by a guy named Jerry Manders, Four Arguments Against Television. And it was saying television is on the whole a bad thing for society and people, that it had not fulfilled its original promises of being this wonderful educational medium, and it was basically taken captive by corporate advertisers, and the format itself was kind of bad for us in many respects. And I got fascinated by this, so I started reading more and more stuff, and pretty soon, by midterm, my rough draft was 30 pages. And she could have said, "Oh, I'm not going to read this if it's over 15 pages. You need to trim this." Instead, she encouraged me and said, you just keep on doing it. I wouldn't do this for everybody, obviously, because that's too much work, but they're not going to do it anyway. Most of them are not going to write 15 pages. I'm going to have to get on their case. You go ahead and keep doing it. By the time that I handed it in, it was 70 pages.
Wow.
And she read it, and she actually, I wonder if I have it in a box somewhere stored away. If I don't, that's kind of a discredit on my part. Because I should have saved it. It's evidence of how much work she was willing to put in when she thought it was merited. And so she went through the entire 70 pages and gave me feedback in red ink, because that's how everything was done at the time on it. And that's really to her credit.
That's great. That's wow. What a story.
So she's also a model for me of like what it means to go above and beyond. I don't think I can actually say that I've measured up to her example now that I think about it.
Yeah, I think if I was in that position, I would be more likely to say 70 pages is too long. Try to bring it down. But maybe looking at the first draft. But do you think that she paid a cost, like it was costly for her to be available in general, because you have to keep a baseline to be alive in that way, so you don't miss students with that potentially good paper? But
so that's a great question. I mean, maybe if she had been in a different point of her career and personal life, she wouldn't have done that, because let's say somebody's going through a divorce. They don't have time to read 70-page papers unless those are like nice distraction for them. Or like if she was going up for tenure, she was tenured at that time. She'd been around probably for at least 10 years. And her husband actually was working. He was the drama professor at the time. So they were well established. Now you could ask where I thought you were going with that was asking, well, what about all of her other current students? Is this taking too much time away from them? And I suppose she probably felt as if, well, the other students aren't really going to do anything other than the bare minimum. So I don't have to give them that much time and attention because there's not that much called for. And so maybe she had a surplus. And this goes to something else that you had proposed as sort of the correlative of work, rest, or leisure, or something that's not work. And you talk about this too in your on work piece, that with some I think with some jobs you can say like the work and the rest are like totally separated off from each other. There's also ways of working where the normal amount of rest that would be built into it gets sucked out of it. You think about these Amazon workers who are on these very strict time clocks for things and are not allowed sufficient bathroom breaks. Maybe any decent work has to have a lot of periods of rest within it. And I think that the teaching that she was doing at the time still had that,
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of ways in which teaching these days has been made into something less restful as you're doing the
Mhm.
work, you know.
Especially if we regard teaching as something to get over, to just get it over with. I do it when I'm
Mm,
the most sleepy, the sleepiest hours of my day, or the grumpiest hours of my day. I'll assign teaching to those, because then
yeah,
if that becomes challenging, then the person will get really irritated. It's like, no, this is not supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be uh,
routine.
routine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
In general, I think it is. It makes a big difference what we contrast work with. We can contrast work with rest. We can contrast it with leisure. We can
mm,
contrast it with play. And all those different contrasts bring out different aspects of work. As you said,
yeah,
work can be restful. Physical work can be mentally very restful. It can
yeah.
be mentally refreshed after doing manual work, or after cleaning the house.
And the same work also, and this is something that you hit on in your piece as well, and talking about work and relationships with other people.
Mhm.
So imagine that you're working a restaurant job, and it's a busy night, and everybody's kind of out of sorts because there's an election and things are very factionalized, and so people are in bad moods. It's not as fun working as when the local sports team has won a victory and everybody's in a good mood or something like that. The relations that you're having with people are quite different in tone.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think that makes a difference. We have the Wisconsin Center just across the street from us, and that's a big, essentially, like a meeting place. It's where the Midwest Auto thing is held, and all the gearheads show up to look at cars and talk about that, and then they'll have Comic-Con or whatever else is going on, right? And so if you were in a position where you're working at a place like that, whether it's a security guard or a cleaner, whatever, it's probably quite different in field depending on who the crowd is.
Mm. The
you know
background of the work, right? Right.
yeah.
What's going on? It's like cleaning like it's the sidewalk while it's windy. The strong wind is blowing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first your first job was, and when was it?
Well,
You have a
you know,
video on this. You have.
yeah, I mean, there was work that was paid cash,
Mhm.
and a lot of that was chores. And then sometimes you would do something for somebody and they'd give you some money, like shoveling snow or stuff like that. But the very first job that I had, that was an official job in the sense that I had I had a payroll, and I got, paid into Social Security and stuff like that. I was 15 years old. And it's kind of an unusual thing. Like, a lot of people, their first job is mowing lawns or working at a concession stand, or something like that, right? Working in a restaurant is very common too, but mine was being what was called a teen peer educator. So
Mhm.
back then, the way that we would typically find work is you would look in the local paper and there'd be a want ads, and then you would circle the things, and you would then make a phone call, or you would show up to the place and ask for an application that you filled out by hand. And this was with the Waukesha YWCA, which is the Young Women's Christian Association, which is sort of like the YMCA. People can stay there. They have exercise facilities. They do a lot of local programming. And this was paid for with a grant from the city of Waukesha. And Waukesha at that time, which still is the Republican capital of Wisconsin, was having an extraordinarily high rate of teen pregnancy.
Mm.
Surprise, surprise,
Mm.
because there's all this like abstinence only education stuff, which we know is actually
Mm.
counterproductive. So, and this is in the 1980s, like the mid 80s.
Mhm.
So it included training, which you would be paid for, and you were supposed to go into schools. So they had high schoolers, and we would go into schools, and it would be middle schools and other high schools, and then we would talk to the kids about having sex, and why you should be careful, and probably abstinence is the best idea. So we were still pushing this abstinence only education, although if they asked us about contraceptives, we could tell them about that, and we got taught about all this stuff, which was kind of cool.
Mhm.
And the general idea was, oh, they don't listen to adults, they'll listen to other teenagers who are cool teenagers coming in well informed and stuff like that. And the
Wow.
program was a total failure, by all measures. And as a matter of fact, two of the members of the program actually hooked up with each other during
Oh, wow.
the program. But so they gave us like a month worth of training where I would bike into Waukesha from where we lived out in Wales. It was about a 15-mile bike ride, and then I would go there, and they would teach. We sat in a thing, and there was kids from all different schools, and we'd sit in a circle and discuss contraceptives or how the
Mhm.
reproductive system works. Or we also learned a lot of stuff about drugs and about psychology in a very basic way, and
Mhm.
about sex and intimacy, because we were supposed to be like well-informed people. So the
Mhm.
training went on for like a month, and that was cool. And then these people who ran the program, they would come and pick us up at our high school, and we got to get out of class, and we got paid to go
Mhm.
in. And we
Mhm.
would do these like values clarifications things. What do you want out of life? What do you want out of a partner? We did this one exercise that I remember where you would have like the guys would be with me, and then all the girls would be with a female instructor,
Mhm.
and we would have like the big paper thing that you flip over and you write on it. Okay, what do you find, what do you want in an ideal mate? And
Mhm.
there'd be some that would be like perfect body,
Mhm.
and intellect and sense of humor and all that. And so then we'd let them go through that, and then we'd say, okay, you've met your perfect mate.
Mhm.
Now they get in a car accident, and they're maimed for life, and
Right.
their perfect body is gone. What do you
Wow.
do?
Yeah.
So we'd kind of try to shame them into saying that, oh no, personality is so much more important. And none
Right.
of these, I don't think any of these things had any real positive impact in a
Mhm.
in a group way. They might have had a useful impact on individuals, but I was getting paid,
Mhm.
and it was a job, and I
Very
thought it was
interesting.
interesting.
Very interesting job. Very interesting. Part of a social experiment. And that, you said that for the most part, maybe it didn't work. Didn't.
No.
But yeah, it provided like experimentation with rules, social rules, like discussions,
Yeah.
the Socratic method in some form, in some preliminary
Yeah,
form.
and after that, I had more, you could call them mundane kind of jobs. I worked in a Walgreens as a stocker. Um, I worked in a couple restaurants,
Mhm.
nothing fancy,
Mhm.
but washing dishes and cooking and cleaning and things like that. Those are really useful skills, I think.
Mhm.
Um, I worked for a tree cutting service for a while, and that was kind of fun. Yeah, actually, I did some carpentry and some painting. Sometimes I do things with my family. Um, Worked in a factory. I mean, I did all sort. I worked in a Walmart for 3 weeks before I had enough of that. 3 weeks was about the limit of a job that I didn't like.
Mhm.
If I really didn't like the job, I could stick it out for 3 weeks, and then I'd be like, I got to find something else. And we had the luxury in the 1990s of being able to find jobs very easily. They weren't good jobs, but you could easily find jobs just by looking in the newspaper and following
Mhm.
up on that.
Mhm.
Whereas nowadays, for the younger people, there's so many steps to go through, and there aren't as many decent jobs available. And the jobs that pay minimum wage is not enough to really live on these days.
Right. Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah. When I was a teenager, I think since I was 12 or 13, my grandfather had a store after he retired from the Air Force, from the Army.
okay,
He opened his own store in Tehran, in like downtown, in a kind of commercial, not commercial. It's like a the bazaar. It's like
yeah,
very very down to earth, like chain series of like stores.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he sold in his stores like instruments related to sports and posters of like famous um, sports people, like
so he was
soccer
specializing in
players.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And what was significant about that, as I was thinking about it recently, was when I went with him. It was during the summers that I would go and help him out. He invited me actually to go, and I didn't think that I'm going to work with my grandfather. For me,
So
it
there was a
was like
play
it
aspect
was
to it.
his life. Yeah, it was like I'm just accompanying him, and that's his life. I didn't
Yeah.
say that he's going to work. It's like that's how he's living.
Yeah.
And we had a routine. He was very his schedule was very tight. It's very routine because of his army background. Um, we took the bus always on time, even though that was his business. But he was like he was timing was as if we are meeting an external, external demand for precision.
Yeah.
Um, And it was very fulfilling, very interesting to see society from that perspective. And there was a lot of waiting in that job. It was like waiting at the counter for the next customer to come. It's just waiting and
Yeah.
daydreaming. Um,
When I worked in a gas station that was also a convenience store, there was a lot of that as well. And
mhm,
I liked that aspect because, I mean, sometimes you would get bored, right? But you could read a book or you could write a letter or you could just stare out the window or, whatever you wanted. I think that's kind of nice to have as a luxury. When you have a job where, when in restaurants, they have this saying, if you have time enough to lean, you have time enough to clean. And there's this, oh, you must be doing the next thing that's ahead of you.
right.
And that kind of, I don't like that so much,
Mhm,
quite
mhm.
frankly.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't have to be so fast paced.
Yeah.
It can be mixed. So
I
yeah,
mean, your grandfather illustrates that things can be regimented
regimented.
without
Right.
being obsessed with making every single second count,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And part of his very strict regiment was like in the afternoon, he took a 20 minute nap.
Okay.
So he would close, lock the door, and just take a 20-minute nap, and then would get back up.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, everything was very lively, energetic, and work. And later on, it's like, oh yeah, that's work. That's work, and then there's life. But at the time, my thinking was not really. I didn't distinguish work as a separate dimension of life.
When you see people in your family working, and it's not just something that they go off to and do and then they come home
Mhm,
and then they do
mhm,
things. I think that's quite helpful because my grandparents were, on my mother's side, were, well, actually on my father's side too, were retired when I was young. But out in Indiana, where my grandfather and grandmother, and then his brother and her sister, who also were married to each other, and then another, um, one of his brothers and his wives, they all retired. They built houses. They actually were the same house, these Wausau homes that you could buy prefabricated. They just had different color schemes in them, but they were exactly the same house. And they plunked them down on the land. And then they lived a retired existence out there. So, that involved a lot of tasks. They had a massive garden, where they would plant all the things that they would cook and can and store up, because they grew up working class, and you maximized every opportunity you had to have good food and to save money.
mhm,
And we would work in the garden with them, picking off potato bugs from the potato plants, or harvesting this or that, or weeding.
mhm,
And then there were other things that were, helping out with the laundry, hanging the laundry up, and
mhm,
things like that. And it wasn't as if it was all fun all the time. You would get kind of bored with some of the tasks, but you would see the other people doing the same thing, and you had a sense why it mattered. And I think a lot of children don't get that experience, and lacking that, it's harder to see work as something that's not just imposed upon you, you know?
mhm, mhm, mhm. It's not like it's sometimes we hear things like, if you had $10 million or $1 billion, would you
What would
still
you do?
work? Would you
Yeah.
still work? Would you? And I think a lot of people would immediately say, no, I wouldn't work. I would travel, and,
Yeah.
or they would, in their fantasies, in their imagination, they would be the ideal consumers, they would just spend the money, or they would go traveling, taking photos for their Instagram, pages or Facebook maybe.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the idea that we could still work, and that there's something else other than economical, the meeting of economical needs, financial needs. There's something else there to be
Yeah.
explored, to be satisfied, to be expressed in a person's life through work. And work would give us like a window, a medium, work as a medium of expression.
Yeah.
Um,
And it depends so much on, there are things where if you're compelled to do it as work, you don't like it.
mhm,
But if you weren't being compelled, you could actually find it enjoyable and fun,
mhm,
or it could be not so much compelled, but being surveilled. You have the micromanager who's like, you're not doing it right.
right,
you know I remember,
exactly.
actually, I'm not going to say precisely who this was, but I was at a family gathering one time
Mhm,
years ago, and we were like doing work, preparing the food, which I have no problem doing. I enjoy food preparation and cooking and stuff like that. And I was peeling shrimp, something I've been doing since I was a little kid, because my mom would have us do that. And this person got on my case because, that little tiny bit of meat at the very, very end of the tail of the shrimp, he wanted that to be preserved. And I was like, this is less than my pinky nail.
Mm.
Who gives
Yeah, yeah,
a rat's
yeah.
ass, right? And he was very insistent about that, and it kind of ruined the experience, in part because there was a conflict. But I also didn't like somebody telling me how to do something that I didn't
Yeah,
have to do anyway, and I was just doing to be nice, you know.
yeah.
And I think there can be a lot of that. I actually quit a job,
Mhm.
that gas station job, because we had a work meeting, and the new manager had come in, and she said, I've been watching on the video camera what you people have been doing at work. They put a video camera in there to keep people from stealing, essentially,
Mhm.
because they did have problems with that. And she said, some of you are during work time, you're just standing around, or you're reading books, or you're writing letters. And I said, well, what are we supposed to do when it gets, slow? And she said, you can dust the shelves. And I was like, dust the shelves? Yeah, some of the, there's dust on some of the cans on the shelves. And I was like, I'm
Yeah,
out of here. Screw this. For
yeah.
minimum wage, I'm not dusting
It's
shelves.
funny that he wanted you to optimize your time, the use of your time.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And I think a lot of other people quit soon afterwards, not for that reason, but for other reasons. This person was a very
right.
micromanaging
Hmm.
boss,
Hmm.
and so,
Yeah, that is slightly different from the shrimp tail scenario, where where that's actually it could give us a good metaphor. I imagine, for example, a student writing an essay, and they have put a lot of thoughts into it, and they're expressing some ideas, and the professor just fixates on the wrong formatting of the, like, his
right.
references are formatted wrongly. That's the shrimp tail kind of objection. And the
You
student will
know,
say, "This is not about that."
yeah,
Go ahead.
this may take us off in a completely different direction, but that is a significant problem in academia. Um, it's very difficult to have a systematic perspective on what exactly is taking place, because everything that we're getting is pretty anecdotal.
Mhm.
But I have students who come to me, and they're anxious about something that they think is going to be a requirement: bibliographical referencing, for example. Am I going to lose points if I don't have this perfect? Or they worry, very much about style and grammar and things like that. And I don't care, so long as I can read it and it's coherent. I'm interested in the ideas that it's expressing, and I tell them this. And I, in the syllabus, if I'm at a place like, for example, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design uses MLA for everything, just do MLA, easy enough. I don't care, if you do something, out of the ordinary, like use Chicago manual style, I'm not going to dock you so long as you're actually telling me where the sources are from. But I get the idea, and this is from across all the different places that I've taught, that there are very many professors out there who are not teaching writing classes, who really, really, really care about bibliographical references, and punish their students if they get it wrong. And I just
Mhm.
don't understand. My life is busy enough, and as a instructor, I'm busy enough. Why would I care about stressing bibliographical
Yeah,
references?
yeah.
It's not like this is preparing them for the real world, where they're going to have to, use the Chicago manual of style.
Mhm.
When they get there, if that's a requirement, then they
Mhm.
can look it up. There's websites for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If they
and
want to
and
be working as the copy editors, or on the
exactly, yeah,
editorial
yeah.
team of a journal, professionally, then it will be very relevant. But
Yeah, and
ordinarily,
I think there's a lot of things. So I want to get your take on this. I'm
mhm.
going to stop talking in a minute. I think there's a lot of, let's call them minutia things,
Right.
that academics stress to these students. Another one is, for example, beginning a paper by putting their name, the class, the semester, what they ate for lunch, all this stuff halfway down, which might have made sense back in the days of typewriting, where you would actually hand papers to each other. But it's totally, it's a complete waste of everybody's time, because if they're submitting their papers electronically, I know exactly who's submitting the paper. Papers don't need titles, because I don't care, because we're
Mhm.
just doing course papers.
Mhm.
I know what semester it is. I know what class it is. I know that I'm the instructor. All of this is
Mhm.
like totally redundant, but they've got it drilled in their head that this is important. And they, even
Mhm.
though I tell them over and over again, don't hand in papers with this because I don't want you taking up, the space. I want 4 full pages. This doesn't count as a full page.
Mhm.
They keep doing it. And it must be because there's so many other instructors who are demanding this of them
Yeah.
that they become conditioned, and
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of little things like that that are not important. To come back to the work thing, work is a product as well as a process. That doesn't need to be in the product. Those don't have to be the criteria by which it's evaluated, and yet the students think that it is, and it produces work that's not as good, because if they're, if a portion of their brain or their time or whatever is being used for this unnecessary crap, it's
Mhm.
not being devoted to what we really want them to be focusing on.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I mean, is it that bad in psychology? And
Mhm.
what are,
Uh,
what are some of the minutia you've seen them
mhm.
focusing on?
I think formatting and referencing, the formatting of the references also, it's something that a lot of instructors focus on. And I think it has to do with just the ease of turning those things into rules that you can clearly communicate to students,
Yeah, I
and
think
then
you're
you can
right.
clearly evaluate it too. The part that we want to focus on, the part that really matters, is more difficult to communicate because it has to do with the human, the exercise
Yeah,
of the intellect, and everybody does it in a different way. It's difficult to turn it into a formula and like algorithmically, like make a
yeah.
robot follow those steps. So it is also difficult to evaluate, I
So
think.
it's the appearance of rigor, but
Right.
it's not really rigor, right?
Right. I think so. Yeah.
Interesting.
And people, I think we find reward when we have a system that is easy to apply. We feel rewarded by it,
Yeah.
and we feel confused when the evaluation system is vague, when it really demands that we are present in it. Um, so I think those instructors fall into the trap of um, adopting an easy style of instructing and evaluating, and then the students learn to focus on those aspects.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
those are the easiest to meet, to manipulate, to
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. This is related also. I think it's related to work. We can extend it to. We can apply this. What is relevant? What is central? What is at the heart of any work, and what
yeah,
is not at the heart of the work, but is the part that is easier to instruct, easier to begin with, but easier to evaluate and talk about, and turn into rules and formulas and algorithm. It also, I think, relates to this idea of evolutionary psychology, cultural evolution, that
yeah,
each generation discovers some things, and it faces the challenge of passing those discoveries to the next generation. So rules are always rules that are clearly formulated, are easier to pass to the next generation. So a good
yeah,
professor who has a lot of wisdom might find it very difficult to pass those wisdom pieces of wisdom to the next generation. But a not so good professor who has some rules on formatting,
yeah,
they
yeah,
have a
yeah.
very easy job to pass those along.
I was just thinking about how this could transfer to other places, and to go back to like cleaners or janitorial work. So most people, especially if they haven't done a lot of cleaning in their lifetime, if it's been left to somebody else in the household or the organization, they don't realize how quickly things become messy, dirty, untidy. For
Mhm,
example,
mhm,
carpeting in an office very quickly gets all sorts of things, little bits of paper, wrappers, things like that all over the place. Bathrooms get dirty very quickly.
mhm,
And cleaners know this because they're doing the work. And thinking about evaluation, how do you evaluate whether somebody's doing a good job? Interestingly, if you're evaluating janitorial work, it's what you don't see that matters. There's
mhm,
no specks of things. The mirror doesn't have any water spots on it, or the carpet doesn't have any little bits of paper. And if you come in day after day after day and you see something that's like that, then if there are, let's call them trivial blemishes, you're prone to say, oh, the cleaners aren't doing their job. Look at that little speck over there, and you don't realize just how dirty it could be if the cleaner was doing a bad job, because
mhm,
you've got a good cleaner. And so
mhm.
you're kind of used to that. I mean, compare that to the proverbial gas station bathroom that's just disgusting and nobody cleans it for, weeks on And that
Mhm.
should be your reference point,
Mhm.
not the pristine bathroom that you enter in just about every day. And oh, it's wonderful because there was somebody here last night cleaning it all up.
Mhm.
And there's somebody who comes in maybe halfway through the day after everybody who doesn't do any cleaning has thrown towels all over the place and things like that. So
Mhm.
there's an issue of evaluation there,
Mhm.
and the realisticness of the standards,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
and we could say similar things, I think, with a lot of the other types of what we consider menial jobs, restaurant work, retail work. you know we tend, unless we have some experience in it, we don't often know just how much goes into it, and
Mhm.
how often these things have to be done in order to keep them looking good.
Mhm.
you know
Mhm. Mhm. And I think again that applies to not just menial works, but there are menial aspects to uh, works that we might think are very unlike janitorial work. For example,
yeah.
somebody who plays the piano, a lot of what
Mm.
they do is just sit down and go through the scales. So
All the
that,
background work.
yeah,
Yeah.
the background work,
Yeah.
the rhythm, and as you said, only they know. Like if somebody who professionally plays an instrument or plays the piano, they know that they haven't practiced yesterday, and they feel it in their fingers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like somebody who cleans, they can detect if there's a bit of a delay in the
You
cleaning
know,
schedule.
so that, going back to the cleaning thing with that, and talking about the Army connection,
Mhm.
one of the cool things, I mean, there's a lot of things that are obviously screwed up with the military, no matter where you go, but one of the good things about it is, if you've made your, like in the United States, there's a big distinction between officers and enlisted and non-commissioned officers. But if you've worked your way up from being a private to being a staff sergeant, if you're a staff sergeant, you're probably not doing much cleaning. You're telling other people to do that, but you know what good cleaning looks like because you had to go through it
Mhm.
yourself, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Whereas many other institutions, things are too separated out. Like I wouldn't expect officers within the U.S. Army to know that much about cleaning because they don't do a lot of it. They go to college instead, and as cadets they have to do some cleaning, but it's not like being in basic training. you
Mhm.
know in other places, where you don't have such a strict separation, and officers often have spent some time as enlisted people, I would expect they would actually know quite a bit about that. Or
Mhm.
where there's a tradition, like in the British military, of taking care of your feet.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
officers are held accountable if their enlisted men's feet turn out bad. Um, there's an attentiveness there,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
to a task, to a set
Right,
of operations that has to be done, that we call work.
right, right. And do you think that going through and being on both sides of giving the order and following the order might cultivate a sense of this is not just an individual work, but this is our work. We are doing something. We are accomplishing something as a group.
Yeah, and it's interesting if we turn it around the other way. So, like, we think about the leaders should have spent some time taking orders and doing the tasks, doing the
Mhm.
work, right? But what if we also took the people who are in these lower positions, and we say, okay, you're one of the places that I used to teach. They did something where you were chancellor for a day.
Mhm.
Now, you didn't get to make any decisions that could actually affect the institution itself, but you had to like see some of what the chancellor did, because maybe because students were complaining so much about the
Mhm.
administration. So it's a way of saying, look at all the crap I have to deal with. But
Mhm.
that could be kind of interesting to
Yeah, yeah,
do,
yeah, yeah.
be a boss for the day and have to
Sure,
manage things.
sure, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll mention one last thing because we are almost done with 1 hour has passed already. One of the things I did in my former institution was I had this crazy idea. People just laughed at me when I said it. I said, the department should get together and all the teachers who are teaching courses, we should coordinate what we teach and the material. We should try to not have too much overlap between what
Yeah.
we're teaching, and we have some kind of coherence. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, you want to spend more time
I know.
on this? Like, yeah, but that kind of accomplishing the sense of I really wanted to see what we can do as a department, as a
Yeah.
group of teachers, uh, and
In a thoughtful, deliberative way, right?
Mhm, mhm. To make it,
Um,
yeah.
it almost seems like there's a moral responsibility to do that.
Mhm,
That's just not being met in most places,
mhm,
right? It's not just a matter of prudence, but we're taking these students' money and we're, trying to give them an education that they're going to be able to use for a lifetime, just throwing a whole bunch of random classes at them taught by people who have different, approaches. That doesn't seem like a particularly smart way to go about it for smart people, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
So they didn't like that, huh?
yeah. It seemed like a waste of time to some people. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot more we can talk about actually, about work. I feel like we just scratched some of the surface.
Yeah.
But well, thank you very much for this.
Yeah, I
And,
always enjoy our conversations.
look forward to future talks, and happy new year in advance, and
Likewise
hopefully
to
we'll,
you.
we'll meet again soon in 2022.
Indeed.